Okay, on the show today, the legend that is Leslie Kaminoff, senior yoga teacher, co-author of the book Yoga Anatomy, co-founder of the Breathing Project, his Yoga Anatomy online, yogaanatomy.net project's very good. He is fun, he's smart, he doesn't mess around. Leslie, it's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, Mark. That's one of the best intros I've ever had.
Cut the crap, isn't it? It's the main things, and I've always liked your style. Your book is pretty much on you and Amy Matthews' book is on the shelf of pretty much every yoga teacher in the world, right? It's like one of the best-selling yoga anatomy books.
Well, yeah, we figure we don't have exact numbers, but between all the foreign translations, and there's like 20 some odd foreign language translations, there's got to be 1 million copies in print worldwide, at least at this point. So, yeah.
How does that feel that 1 million people have looked at your book?
Terrifying, because we're just putting the finishing touches on the revisions for the 3rd edition.
Yes. And
what's terrifying is that those words that we typed 10 years ago, which we would never say the same way today, are out there. And that's the, I mean, if you're live teaching, you can change your opinion. You can say whatever, oh, I was teaching this last year, but now I have these other thoughts, and, people cut you some slack. But, when you put it in print, and it's printed on the page in ink, and it's on all those shelves, and it's in all those teacher training programs, that's a whole other level. I say this when I teach workshops. It's like, if I do my job, you're going to have a few ahas. And that's what keeps us going. That's what fuels us. Those aha moments, right? I mean, that's before. But what we have to look at is the fact that the ahas are really made up of all the little uh-ohs that happen along the way. And the uh-ohs are the things like, oh, wow, that thing's really attached there, or that's really the shape of that, or that thing isn't the way I thought it was, and I need to change not just what I'm doing in my own practice, but what I'm teaching people to practice if I'm a teacher. And then if you're a teacher trainer, then that's like an exponentially bigger uh-oh, because it's what you've trained people to say when they're training other people. Well, think of the position Amy and I are in. We wrote the book that the teacher trainers use to train people to teach other people with. So, it's terrifying. Yeah.
I think it's what makes books both special, and even today books are special. Like, I'm just working with my publisher on the second book, and looking at the front cover, because it's making permanent the word,
Yeah.
And that is a sort of magical property in a way, and it's scary that it's there. I mean, someone actually held up my book in one of a lecture I was doing, and argued against me using my own point, and sort of said, well, you said, and then in chapter 7, I was like, oh, I can't even remember saying that, but cool. It was a funny thing. They were using past me against me, and it was a strange phenomenon.
We should do that ourselves. We shouldn't wait for an outside critic to do that. We should always be our own toughest critics. And Amy and I are, when we work together, we're like that, because we push back against each other's way of thinking and language, and it's been a very fruitful collaboration. But when we sat down to do this 3rd edition, we were literally looking at the way we thought about things 10 years ago. The thing was published in 2011, the 2nd edition, and we had written it the year before. So it's, if you haven't evolved your point of view,
right,
something seriously wrong with you as an educator.
What have you been doing for 10 years if you haven't changed your mind at all, right? Okay, let's take a step back, Leslie. How did you get interested in yoga, anatomy? How did this begin? Just give us the basics, because a little bit of your story before we go back into the topics.
Well, I took my first yoga class in 1978. So I was 20. And I was at the invitation of my father, who was having kind of a midlife crisis. And he was trying to turn his life around. And one of the things he was doing was yoga. And he found it very beneficial. And so he invited me to a class right here in New York on 24th Street at the Shivananda, which is still there. I don't think it's open, but it's still there. And I took my first class there. And the thing that got me was the Shavasana, the final relaxation. I don't think I had ever really, on purpose, relaxed before. I mean, you're exhausted at the end of the day, you lie down, you go to sleep, and that's what you do when you lie down, but, you think about it, like for a 20-year-old, having been living on my own for a few years in New York and working and just doing whatever I had to do to get by, you don't, lying down on the floor with the intention of doing something conscious
Mm-hmm.
inside your body was not, it had never occurred to me. And so that was transformational. That was, you could say that was my first real experience of embodiment.
And what hooked you with it then? Okay, so you did this, it felt good, it was nice to have a Shavasana, you know.
Yeah.
It almost, don't get me wrong, Leslie, you don't seem like the type, right? Like, one reason I get on with you is your personality is a little bit closer to mine and a bit less similar to most yoga teachers, let's be honest. Like, so
it depends where the teacher is from and who they hang out with, you know. I mean, I mean, I'm not a vegan. I don't, you know, I don't protest for animal rights or things like that. Well, yeah, those are opinions that everyone has them. But what got me was there were a lot of levels that it got me at. I mean, I took a beginner's course after that first class, and the philosophy is what really was a hook for me, because I was very interested at that time in just alternate ways of looking at the universe and reality, and just trying to understand what's at the end of a long series of questions of why. You know, why, and what do you get to when you cannot ask why anymore? You know, because I was that annoying kid in class when I ever bothered to attend class, which is not very often. I barely got out of high school. So it was the philosophy. And then when I signed up for my teacher training in 1979 at the main ashram, which is up in Canada, north of Montreal, I got hooked on another level because they needed help. They were putting on this huge festival. They were organizing a big thing, pretty much, you know, the 1979 version of what you're doing. It was called the Festival of Inner Light, and they needed to build a stage. And then as I was helping them build this stage, you know, I stayed on after my teacher training longer than I had planned. You know, it was like, so who's going to be the stage manager? And they were like, what's the stage manager? And I was like, oh boy. So that's where my theater background came in, because I had a background in, you know, theater arts, and you know, I had been working in the theater and doing lighting and sound and production stuff in high school. So, you know, there was like a place for me intellectually, in terms of the practice and what it was doing for my body. And there was stuff to do that I was good at that was valued. And so I very quickly got sucked into working pretty much full time for that organization, and ended up in India, and I became a Swami, fast-track Swamidom.
You're a Swami. I'm trying to imagine you as a Swami.
Well, okay. Well, imagine me at 22 years old being fed up with myself and the way I'd been in life, and, you know, conducting myself in personal relationships, which is, you know, a polite way of saying I was, you know, fucking anything that could move. And I'm just so glad the internet didn't exist back then, because I mean, seriously, right? I mean, I would have been taken down ages ago with the current culture the way it is. But I wanted a break from myself. And, you know, there wasn't a very sophisticated conversation back then about this thing that we call spiritual bypassing. But, you know, I just wanted to jump all the intermediate, messy stages of figuring out why I was engaging in that behavior and just stop doing it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the thing that they don't tell you when they hand you the Swami handbook, along with your orange robes and your secret mantra, pardon me, I have a little mucus. The thing they don't tell you is that, you know, when you announce to the world that you have given up your own freedom to make personal choices, because you surrender to the authority of the guru. So that's the obedience vow. You surrender your own finances, you know, poverty, right? And celibacy. Those are the three vows: obedience, poverty, celibacy, that you take. It's very similar to being a priest. You know, at least in the context of that organization, when you announce to the world by wearing the orange in that organization, what falls into your lap? Well, I got sent to West Los Angeles, West Hollywood, actually, on Sunset Strip, running this yoga community as a 23-year-old with all the authority. Everyone had to listen to me. I was only answerable to Swami Vishnu, and he was off doing his, you know, world tour, peace missions and all that. So basically I was in charge. I was handling more money than I'd ever seen in my life because I was in charge of the center's finances. And as far as the celibacy is concerned, apparently there seems to be nothing more attractive to members of the opposite sex than someone that's taken a vow of celibacy. And here I am.
Well, that's very true. I mean,
Yeah,
people want what they can't have, right?
I was not prepared for any of that. Actually, I handled the, you know, the authority and the money much better than I handled the celibacy thing. So basically, my
The
son
money,
has
the honey, and the power, they're the three that get us all, right? I mean, they're three things that are there in a big way. And anyone that's thrust into a position of having those at a young age, who maybe hasn't yet developed the maturity, it makes sense that they're going to be tricky to handle. It's interesting, actually. The fame might be another one we could add to that list, right?
Well, back then, no one was famous as a yoga teacher except for 2 or 3 people in the world. You know, people knew who Iyengar was, and I mean, they knew who Swami Vishnu. I mean, you know, they were mainly Indian guys, but Westerners who were famous as yoga teachers back then were very few and far between. So there wasn't. We didn't start using the term industry attached to yoga until I'd say early into the mid 90s, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that was only, honestly, 10 years after the word industry got attached to the word fitness. The fitness industry itself was only a decade old when it sort of sucked yoga into it. And I was present for both developments. In LA for the fitness thing in the early 80s, because I was working eventually in sports medicine, because I did develop an interest in anatomy. And, you know, when I left the Shivananda organization, I went to work for a rather famous a doctor, a chiropractic orthopedist named Leroy Perry, who had just started a place called the International Sports Medicine Institute. And that's where I got a lot of my exposure to things like bodywork, you know, myofascial release, physical rehabilitation, biomechanical analysis, and just seeing a buttload of x-rays every day. Everyone who walked in that door was given full spine AP lateral x-rays. And where I was working was right next to the x-ray station. I wasn't working there as a yoga person. I was working there as a technician doing microelectrical therapy, because I picked up this, you know, skill set of working with these emerging instruments then, which is sort of like microelectrical acupuncture. And so that's how I originally got my foot in the door. But right around then, fitness was exploding. You had a lot of these streams that came together geographically in Los Angeles at the time. You had the fitness culture was developing out of the running craze. Bodybuilding had gotten a lot of attention because of Schwarzenegger and pumping iron and all of that. And you had the Gold's Gym guys who were coming in to get fixed by Leroy because they were always injuring themselves. But that morphed into weight training for your average guy on the street because of Nautilus. That got invented because
Nautilus, yeah. And people listening, they might not realize that fitness was invented in the modern context as a thing.
It was.
Now, yes, there were gymnasiums in ancient Greece, blah, 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 but it was really only as I was a child that, you know, I remember my parents getting hold. We were a bit slower to catch on in rural Cambridgeshire in England, that they were like, okay, we need to be fit as a family. And here's your tracksuit. And it was a thing then. And older generation just going, what are you talking about? What is this? Why are you jumping up and down to aerobics?
Add something extra to the way we're living our modern lives to not die of a heart attack in your 40s. Because Dr. Cooper's work on aerobics had been out for a while, you know, and people don't realize the term aerobics was coined by researchers who were saying, okay, if you're this age, this gender, you know, you need to get your heart rate up to this working zone to have heart health. That was aerobics. So yeah, that all came together with Nautilus, which let people work out with weights without killing themselves, because free weights are just dangerous, even for people who know how to use them. And the one factor you cannot overlook, Jane Fonda. She was a huge influence on the development of the group fitness movement, and people were doing it at home with their VHS tapes. They were buying VCRs just to play Jane Fonda's tape. She's the only non-engineer to win a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Electronic Engineering Association because of how many VCRs she sold.
Wow.
Right? And she was just down the block in West LA from where we were.
I mean, LA really was the epicenter for it, as far as I can tell. Things like people don't even, the word Nautilus isn't famous now in England, but every gym you go to has those machines with the weights. You put in the pin, you play the pin, there's the wires. Right?
That's the development. And don't forget, 1984, what was happening in Los Angeles?
Olympics.
Exactly. So all of that was coming together. And that's really was some of the really strong origins of the fitness industry. And then I was present in the same sort of ground zero way when 10 years later, fitness industry turned around and looked at yoga, the way yoga was starting to be practiced, which was like Ashtanga Vinyasa influence. It's like, whoa, people are sweating.
That looks a bit like a fitness class. It got pulled
Yeah.
into the black hole of commercial fitness, right?
Well, exactly. And for a time, believe it or not, this is hard to believe given the current situation, for a time there, the demand for yoga teachers far outstripped the supply because
Yeah, I've heard this in England as well.
wanted them.
People
Yeah.
saying I was one of the first 10 Ashtanga teachers in England I've interviewed, and they
Yeah.
said they were just so busy. They just couldn't possibly do enough classes, and they could charge crazy rates, you know, for one-on-ones. And as you said, again, this might surprise young yogis listening to this, that there was a time when yoga wasn't associated with fitness.
Well, absolutely. It was associated with carpeted rooms where they burnt incense, and your mat was a towel you put down on the carpeting, and it was more of an Eastern Hindu influence thing because it was brought over by swamis, you know, and so there's a real difference in the context in which you would learn yoga from, say, the Shivananda organization, which is where I first learned, or integral yoga, or some of the other lineages that came out of those. You know, those Indian traditions, all the way back to 1893 when Vivekananda came over here and introduced Vedanta at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, right? So those roots go back way, way far. And then the important distinction there, I think, is the sort of what we consider modern postural yoga did not come out of the Swami tradition. It was taught by householders, people who were married and had children, like Iyengar. You know, like Krishnamacharya, his teacher, you know, who was his brother-in-law. My teacher, Desikachar, was Krishnamacharya's son. Patabi Joyce was a householder. You know, so it's a very different, like, living in this world, earning a living perspective that you're getting on the practice from these teachers who were not some renunciate, you know, living in a cave or on an ashram who were being fed by the community, and they didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. A lot of these guys did, including Krishnamacharya, especially Krishnamacharya. He was impoverished in the early years before he met up with the Maharaja of Mysore.
Yeah. When did you move to New York then? So you're on the West Coast.
I never moved to New York. I was born here, dude.
Sure, but then you moved back. You said you're on the West Coast.
Moved back to New York, yeah. From I was in LA for 3.5 years, came back here after the Olympics. I was there for every day of track and field in the stadium because a lot of the athletes we were watching were actually friends and people we had worked with. We didn't get to do the sports medicine for them once they made the team because the USOC takes over and you can't kind of have your personal people with you at that point. But I came back to New York toward the end of 1984, and I've been located here pretty much continuously ever since, with travel, of course. So that's when I came back, and I started working more in dance medicine when I came back because I found a job doing the same microelectrical stuff with an osteopath who specialized in dance medicine. And so it was very similar to the environment that I'd worked in LA. And then I just started my private practice of bodywork because I'd picked up enough, I had absorbed enough at that point for my hands to kind of know what they were doing, even though I wasn't really formally trained with a certificate or anything. But I started seeing people privately. And at this point, I've put in well over, by a conservative estimate, I'd say 30,000 client hours just doing table work. So that informs tremendously what I do when I'm teaching.
All the hands-on work you've done.
Yeah. And interestingly, it informs most especially the ways of teaching that don't involve or can't involve hands-on work like what we're doing now. Because it's like, well, if I wanted to give this person this experience with touch, how can I translate that into something they can embody with themselves if they're maybe in their living room halfway around the world with just a Zoom connection? So that's part of what I'm going to talk about in one of my presentations.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a little gap before the presentations now. Tell us about the sort of growth of yoga you've seen as you've been in New York for that period. You
mean from the 80s till now?
Yeah. What are some of the main, you've seen a lot of changes, you've been at the hub of that, like LA, New York's a big center for global yoga in terms of its changes.
Yeah, well, when I came back in the mid 80s, I established my private practice and I started jonesing for a space to teach in. It's a disease yoga teachers have. They can't walk by an empty space for rent or for let, as you say, and not imagine themselves teaching a class in it. It is kind of a sickness. And so I started a studio in '87, and that was right around the time I was starting a family, my first marriage. My first son was born in 1990, and I ran that place for a while. But the significant thing that happened toward the end of the '80s is I met Desikachar in 1988 at a seminar at Colgate University, which is upstate from here, upstate New York. And he just ruined me. And, I thought I had some stuff figured out about breathing and how to teach it and how to coordinate it with the breath. And he just literally stood it on its head and turned it upside down. And I couldn't even get my own breathing together for about 6 months after I met him. And I should have just stopped teaching and just taken a hiatus and said, look, I don't think I can keep saying what I've been saying, but I don't know what to say yet. And this is why I empathize so much with people that come and take my workshops, because, I'm sort of replicating that a little bit for them. And I know that there's this strange zone that you can get into when you get these ahas, but it feels mostly like uh-ohs because you haven't really digested and assimilated the new thing yet. It's not yours. It's not part of yourself. Right. And, the tendency is to want to go out and just regurgitate what you heard me say, or I wanted to regurgitate what I heard Desikachar say, but, it takes a while to metabolize this stuff. And so that was, through the late '80s after I met Desikachar, there's a whole sort of reimagining of what it was to lead group yoga classes. And I couldn't really figure out how to do it and give people the individualized, modification that my eye was telling me that they needed. And so what I would do if I had a group going, they'd be starting the sequence I was teaching, everything go fine until I made the mistake of actually looking at someone. And then I was like, oh, okay, hang on a sec. And I had to run over and work with them. And everyone else stopped what they were doing because I had stopped teaching. And they gathered around and they were looking, and it was fun. It was exciting. It was informative. We were all learning. It just wasn't a group class. So I stopped calling what I did group classes, and I called it clinic. So just come to clinic, show up, we'll see what you got and we'll work with it. And I kind of went along that way for a while after I closed my first studio and opened another one. And, we were just doing clinic and more of the therapeutic work. That's when I started teaching my anatomy course, which we eventually put online at yoganatomy.net. So we're in the early '90s now. And that's when yoga really started hitting what you could call the mainstream. Celebrities started doing it. I was good friends at the time with the folks that started the Jivamukti Center. In fact, my second partner, who's mother of 2 of my children, I met. She was one of the original main teachers at Jivamukti. And so that was just a real hotbed. That, and on the West Coast, of course, Yoga Works. And those are the 2 places Pattabhi Jois landed when he came back to the States in like '93. And so it just rocketed. It took off, as we said. And it was inevitable that somebody would jump into that gap between supply and demand in the yoga teacher market and go to the owners of the clubs and say, hey, look, you already have people on the payroll who know how to lead group fitness. They're called aerobics teachers. Give them to me for a weekend. And on Monday, you can have yoga on your schedule. And thus Yoga Fit was born, right? Brilliant business model. I take nothing away from her that she figured that out. And it was brilliant. As a business move, yes. As how it hit people like me. Yeah. Some people who dedicated their lives to this and know that it's a lifelong thing and you're
trying to imagine it happening to other things, if there was a key fit or like some art that people really devoted their life to and
there was that
and spiritual, and all of a sudden it became in every fitness studio. And I could see there was a period where I saw the old school yoga teachers having quite a lot of resentment, and you'll still see this. They're like talking about Instagram in disparaging ways, and there's valid critiques, but I also see some sort of coming to terms now that this change has happened. The cat is well and truly out of the bag.
Yeah. Well, what's ironic about that, actually, now that you mention it, is so a bunch of us who were getting together for these conferences that we were organizing, some of which I was helping to produce, like the Unity and Yoga conferences, and eventually the Yoga Journal conferences, which kind of took over in that business, is that, we'd get together and say, have you seen what they're doing? Have you seen this Yoga Fit thing or whatever? And we go, yeah, like, you know, we don't know off the top of our heads, just, you know, having a hallway conversation, how many hours we think it should take to train a teacher. We're pretty damn sure a weekend isn't enough. And so enough of those conversations started happening that a bunch of us eventually got together, sat down in a room, or a series of rooms actually. And some of this was organized by Unity in Yoga, an organization that I was vice president of at the time. And we came up with these 200 and 500 hour standards. That was the ad hoc committee that came up with these things in response to, you know, all of that. And then it eventually turned into the Yoga Alliance, which had been Unity in Yoga. Unity in Yoga turned into the Yoga Alliance because there was the same 501c3 nonprofit organization, just did a name change. And the ironic thing is that now a lot of the sort of people who consider themselves to be lifelong learners and, you know, we're in this as a spiritual pursuit, they look at the Alliance the same way that the people that started the Alliance were looking at Yoga Fit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. 200 hours, you know, that's as people say.
Well, we never said it was enough. We just said, what's the minimum?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I thought it should be a teacher designation after 200. I always thought 200 should be an instructor. 500 maybe a teacher after you have some experience in the field and some mentoring. So I was always pushing for it to be, not RYT, but RYI at the 200 level, registered yoga instructor, to at least make that distinction. So they're trying now to backpedal and kind of put that into the ethos of the Alliance with the revised standards. But sadly, I think there's a real profound lack of principled leadership right now at the Alliance, and that's the kindest way I could put it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you've been associated with the yoga, birth of yoga therapy as well, right?
IAYT, I used to be a member of IAYT. I am no longer. I never joined the Alliance. I've never been officially affiliated with the Alliance. I've never been in a board position other than advisory for IAYT. And so the whole therapy thing is a very loaded discussion, because then you're getting into regulatory issues and governmental advocacy, which is something the Alliance actually was doing a good job at. And IAYT hasn't really taken a stance on whether they are for or against yoga therapists being a licensed profession. They think they can run down the middle of that road, and that's where you're going to get clobbered. You have to be on either side of the road. You just have to pick a side, and they haven't. So yeah, no one's listening to me over there now either, as far as I can tell. But why should they? I'm an old guy. I'm not in the game. You know, I just want to be left alone. And you know, every so often I have to shout out that, hey, you know, what you're doing over there could make what I'm doing over here illegal if your agenda gets enacted. Right. So,
you know, I'm seeing this all around the world, different countries and also different arts. There's sort of meditation and mindfulness has similar conversations.
Yeah.
You know, we've had similar conversations with martial arts, you know, which, for example, in France, Aikido is heavily government regulated, and the UK less so. You know, there's the British Aikido board that's like the Yoga Alliance. You know, there's all these conversations around the world, and it's always this sort of, it starts off as sort of a cowboy thing, and it's very underground, done with passionate people. And at a certain point, someone realizes there's money involved, and then committees get involved, and then, you know, there's governing bodies, and then there's a need for laws, but at the same time, no one wants to be controlled. So it's like herding cats. And I hear the same conversations around different arts from different countries. It seems to be just a process things go through.
Well, that's the natural evolution of how things go when, you know, whatever regulatory or hierarchical structures exist in society see something that they can extract from. But, you know, that's true of the very origins of yoga. If you go back to the early history of yoga, you know, these were the guys that said to Vedic society, screw you, I don't want to sit around a fire all day making offerings to Agni and you know, Indra and all these, you know, why are we doing that? You know, we're the Shramanas. We're going to go off in the forest and figure some shit out, you know? And those are the ones who came up with the Upanishads, you know, which were co-opted into Vedic society. Now it's an official part, you know, the darshanas. And so there has to be this constant process of renewal, not just over the long sweep of history as far as these things go, but within our own personal histories of looking, you know, like, am I being true to this thing that I love, that I've dedicated my life to, and am I really speaking my mind about it? The problem is these days, speaking your mind can get you just absolutely slammed
Well, let's
And
go there, because you kind of alluded to this earlier, the sort of cancel culture that's there. I know we've
yeah,
both had to sort of walk some lines on this one, and it's, if part of growing is to not know and to be in discussion
yeah,
and to be able to say things which later prove to be wrong. You know, you can
mm,
publish a second edition of a book, or, you know, whatever it is. It's kind of permanent, and it's kind of embarrassing sometimes. And I hope I'm embarrassed by what was in my book, you know, 10, 20 years from now. It's tricky though in the current environment, isn't it, to have open discussions about many things.
yeah. I mean, we could certainly go on about that quite a bit, but I think what it boils down to is it's a philosophical issue at its root, I believe, and we have been, many of us at least, in the way our educational systems have existed for a while, have been systematically moved away from critical thinking skills. And people don't actually know anymore what a rational argument is. What they think is a rational argument is rationalizing their emotional responses to things without questioning why they're having this.
Ideological conditioning. So
Yeah,
there's always been in history, there's been people who are rational, logical, people who are maverick, free thinkers, people that allowed other people to have different opinions, and people who were authoritarian about opinions. If you know, religions and governments have always stamped down on certain opinions,
yeah,
and it's interesting that we've grown up in a time, and before me, and even in my generation, where sort of critical thinking was encouraged, and the liberal emphasis on diversity of opinion and different opinions being a good thing, and us being able to work it all out and not having to hate you because we had different, you know, points of view.
mm,
You know, that seems to have got out the window, and this weird authoritarianism has come in, not from the government, not from mainstream religion, but from this other source, which is this. It's been slightly strange for me. It's like, whoa, I didn't see it coming from over there. I was expecting the government to be the censorious ones, you know?
you weren't checking the left in the rearview mirror, were you?
There we go. I was looking
Yeah,
over my right shoulder and not the left one.
but you see, it's the same. They're the same.
Yeah.
They're statists. That's the thing. They want to use the power that government has to wield force to enact their agendas. So at their root, there's no difference, you know, and that's what a statist does. They just want to use the force the government wields to enact their agenda against the people they disagree with. But the underlying impulse is identical. And so, yeah, you have to look left, right, up, down, and inside of you for any impulse to want to enforce your views on other people. And that's the one thing that in a rational society would be banned, is the imposition of force. And the government is an entity that we give the power of force to, but to only use in a retaliatory way against anyone else who would yield it. So that's the difference between justice and revenge. And people out there don't know the difference anymore. The very term social justice is an oxymoron, because it's exactly the taking away the power of force from the social sphere that justice is.
Yeah, I mean, if
Otherwise,
you
it's
use the
just
term
vendetta.
collective punishment instead of social justice, then it starts to seem a lot less appealing. I mean, we do things and need to be rewarded and punished on the individual level, not on the level of the group we happen to be a member of. Which, A, we're members of multiple groups. B, how do you weight them? You know, it's like, well, you might be a man, but you also might be Jewish. Okay, how do we weight that? You know, and see who gets to say which of those groups that
Yeah.
need that justice enacted.
I can't play the oppression card as a Jew anymore. That's out the window.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? It's out the window, Leslie. You know, what can you do? What can you do?
Not that I ever attempt to play the oppression card. I have occasionally had to remind people that, you know, hey, we're all immigrants, and my grandparents came over here, you know, basically to avoid being murdered by their neighbors, you know.
Not
And
nothing. But also, it's any arguments from identity is another argument from power, right? It's
no,
if the argument is, well, you know, I really dislike it when people stand up and they say, well, as a, and then start their speech with as a something. I'm like,
what
tell me
checking
your
off circles intersect in the Venn diagram of oppression that's called intersectionality. You know,
tell me your argument. Don't tell me who you are. I mean, that's relevant on another level. It's interesting information. I don't expect a woman to have had the same life experience I've had, and that is relevant, but it's not an argument in and of itself. It's a form of power, simply to say, well, shut the fuck up.
well,
You know?
it's not an in and of itself, you know, that, and one of the most shattering things I ever read philosophically was that we are beings of self-made soul. That sweeps away so much of the carnage of history, if you think about it. Because if you do not only possess your own soul, but actually create it out of all of the volitional choices you make in your life in response to the things you did not choose. Let's not, you know, overlook all of the bad shit that happens to people that they did not choose. Mm-hmm. And that just includes being born with a certain set of genetics and a certain set of parents, let alone how people treated you. Okay, all of those things we didn't choose. Absolutely, no question. And they damage us in profound ways sometimes that make it seem really, really difficult to exercise our free will or volition. And yet that does not wipe out the fact that we possess it, even before we know what it is or that we're exercising it. And the only valid way to claim a powerful identity is to take responsibility for the choices we've made in the face of the things we didn't choose. And that literally is how we make our souls. But if we base our souls on all that other stuff, the nature and the nurture, okay, all the stuff we didn't choose, that is to condemn oneself to eternal victimhood. And this is the kind of conversation I would love to have with someone that valued rational thought enough to actually consider whether that's true or not. Because there's people out there, some smart people, who believe that free will is an illusion, that it doesn't exist, but that we should behave as if it does. Right? I'm looking at you, Sam Harris.
It's a funny one. So, I mean, do you think, this points of view, some of the points of view we're discussing have really strongly got into yoga. I mean, to the point where I'm surprised we both have a career as, you know, liberals. Actually, we were expressing a liberal point of view in the sense of classical liberal of, you know, different people can have different points of view, and that's okay. You don't have to enforce power on people. Yeah.
Sorry, you have to qualify words like liberals with many other words that go with it too.
Yeah, and America it's come to mean a particular, it may tend to mean politically left-leaning, whereas in Europe it means someone who's open-minded. Yeah, and you'd probably use more with the word progressive perhaps for that. But it's
progressives are open-minded?
I don't know, is that progressive not mean that? Is progressive...
They're the ones who want to cancel you and me, Mark.
They're progressive?
Those are the progressives, yeah.
It's wow, that's what you call them. To me, progressive means somebody who's sort of out front, you know, they're sort of out forward thinker.
But they call themselves progressives, yeah.
It's a little bit the Ministry of Peace, isn't it? It's really in charge of war. It's wow. Okay. So how is this going to impact yoga world? So, for example, there's an Indian speaker we're looking at who has no, for the conference, who has no history of abuse, you know, no financial scandals, no sexual scandals. I know, incredible, right? Is generally regarded as wise and funny, you know, popular Indian teacher. But he's sort of we've been told don't get him because he's guilty of wrongthink.
Wrongthink. Well,
he's from another culture, obviously, so he doesn't have a sort of, you know, left-wing American point of view because he's from a different cultural background.
Well, if he likes what's going on in India now with yoga and with the government, he most likely has a pretty right-wing authoritarian point of view.
Do you want to bring people up to speed with that? Because people might not know about that, the Indian thing.
What, nationalists who run the country now?
Yeah, tell the connection people. That's quite unsurprising to many people.
For political, well, it comes up every year around June when I get a number of invitations to participate in something or other that has to do with International Yoga Day.
Okay.
Which is the creation of Modi, the guy that's running India now, and he's an extreme nationalist, right-wing Hindutva nationalist, and he has created a ministry that has taken over Ayurveda and yoga and basically is pushing it with, you know, the advantage of governmental force, not just on people domestically, but worldwide with this International Yoga Day. People don't know about the origins of this. They say, oh, isn't it great that the UN endorsed International Yoga Day? It's like, well, no, do your homework and see if you agree with what this guy is about, because he's the one who started it. And it's so sad, actually, that June 21st is actually my teacher Desikachar's birthday as well. So, you know, I have to separate any acknowledgement that I want to do publicly about
yoga
that
can have these right-wing connotations. It can have these far-left connotations. I mean, it's quite painful to see sort of yoga get dragged into these directions.
But when you say yoga, it's like yoga is not a thing that exists independently from the people that do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people who are into yoga that get dragged this way and that way. Yoga itself is fine, because yoga is a force of nature. Yoga is the tendency of living things to seek homeostasis. And when we align with that on a deep cellular level, then we can find some deep truths about ourselves and the world we live in. So I have no worries about yoga. You know, I don't care if someone, you know, wants to have a dog or a pig in the room with them when they're doing, if that's what it takes for them to get on the mat.
I'd try goat yoga, given a chance. Given half a chance, I'd give it a go. So you know, Leslie, so we don't go too cantankerous at this point. What's kind of buttering your muffin right now? What are you enjoying? What's turning you on? What's
going on with my muffin?
Buttering it. It's a British phrase. Buttering your muffin. What's buttering your muffin? What's you know, sort of exciting you, turning you on? What's positive for you right now?
What's buttering my scone?
Yeah, scone. That's a debate we don't want to get into. Okay, there's warring factions there.
When does a scone become so muffiny that it's no longer a scone?
This is a philosophical inquiry right there. Scone or scone. So what are you enjoying right now? Obviously, you're part of the conference. You know, we're excited to have you part of that. Very happy you stepped up to that.
Embodiment conference is really exciting me, and the degree to which we can deliver a really valuable educational experience with this medium here is actually very exciting to me, because, as you know, I've been doing this in one form or another for over 11 years now with yoganatomy.net. And the way we've evolved how to deliver that material has just gone into overdrive now in this past year. And we talked about agency and free will. You know, the degree of agency that a student online can exercise in a learning environment far exceeds that of a live.
Yep.
You know, what kind of balls does it take, or chutzpah, I mean, if you don't have balls, but, you know, what kind of moxie does it take to stand up in the middle of a class that someone is teaching to a room full of people, roll up your yoga mat and walk out the door? Very few people, even though they may really want to do it, have ever really done that. Here, you just hit a button and you can turn off your camera, stay in the class, or you can leave the class entirely. I love seeing all the blank screens when I'm teaching workshops. I love it, because they just flipped the coin, didn't they? It's like, okay, because we say, this is the part of the class where we're going to practice. And myself and Lydia, my partner who co-teaches with me, has a very good eye for looking at the details of people's practice. This is where we're going to be looking at you, and we will offer some feedback if you're open to it. If not, turn off your camera. And like half the room turns off the camera. I think that's really awesome. How many times in a live room have half the people flipped that no touch coin because they make ear pressure or something like that, right? So that excites me. That really, and this isn't going away. I don't care how good the vaccine is or how comfortable we get being in tight spaces with other people breathing deeply ever again in the future, if we ever do. Even if that all comes back as a possibility, this is never going away, and it shouldn't.
No, it's out of the bag. People, all the yoga teachers who've learned to use Zoom, who won't be going back to studios, all the teachers who used to go to like their rubbish local teacher, and now they're realizing there's something that's a much better fit for them, you know, on the internet, or they realize actually their local teacher's fantastic, and that celebrity from LA really isn't a big deal, you know. Actually, you know, really like in Brighton, we've got Pete Blackaby and Jim Tarrant and Gary Carter. You know, I was like in a class with Jim the other day, and I was so grateful just to be back in a class with him, you know? I was like, thank God.
Brighton is very yoga rich at the moment, isn't it?
We're lucky. And there's a lot here. And I do think a lot's going to fall by the wayside of teachers who, you know, there was an excess of teachers. It's the opposite of the 80s, right? And those who aren't committed will have to get other jobs after this.
There was an excess of instructors.
You're right.
Always,
you're right.
Always a short supply of teachers. That's the decision I would make.
Well, with the scalability of online, if you have a teacher that really has something to offer, whether it's your yoga anatomy course online or someone at the conference who's brilliant, you know, whatever, that can scale. I mean, I just looked at the thing for the conference we're on today, 351,000 people. You know, like that's going to be at 500,000 at some point. Like,
you have a ticker just constantly spinning that runs off the numbers like that?
Go to the website, the embodimentconference.org. It's at the bottom. Look, let me show you. I'll show you it right now. You can, it's literally in real time, 3,501 and 29. If you wait about a second or two, that will, oh, it's slow today. That will tick over and change. It's
auto refresh, right? You can just,
it's an auto refresh, and there we go. Someone just registered. So, but it's the most, like, this scalability, I think, will mean that teachers who have something special to offer will get a lot of students, and very average ones will get none. So I think that is an interesting environment to be in.
Cool. And okay, the other thing that excites me is that everyone that logs in for the yoga class on the yoga channel gets to see that really fun intro that we just filmed.
You've done a fun video. You immediately got up when we were quite, should say for listeners, Leslie's a sponsor of the conference. And I was quite selective about who the sponsors were, because one thing I know from life, if you take money from someone, you're in their pocket. And you got to be careful who that person is. Like, for example, I knew you wouldn't be pushing some hardcore Maoist or far right politics on me. I was like, but you need to be careful. You take someone's money, they can easily say, well, I'll take that away. You know, I made one comment, and someone that lent us £50,000 for the conference messaged me to say, maybe you don't want to do that again, Mark. I'm not threatening you, but maybe you don't want to do that. And I was like, okay, probably won't take money from that guy again. You know, because there's something that came with it.
You put that on Facebook. I questioned that, didn't I?
What's that, sorry?
I questioned that when you did that on Facebook. Yeah, I texted. Yeah, I mean, you could have gotten a lot more from Lululemon to sponsor the yoga channel. I know that. So
there's people who said no to. I won't name them. So no, I think you're a good fit with it in terms of, you know, your anatomical knowledge, but also your sort of wide view of yoga. Sense of humor is always a part of our events, so I think that fits nicely with it. What are you offering through it? Are you offering, you know, sort of telling people about your anatomy online? I mean, that seems to be pretty popular.
Well, it's just all at yogaanatomy.net. That's where you go.
Yoga Anatomy.
That's where they find all the stuff. I'm doing a bunch of other things. I'm working on new material on the Union platform, which is run by a friend of mine, Andrew Tanner, who used to work with the Yoga Alliance. So the stuff I'm sort of workshopping now is sort of going there every week. So yeah, the online stuff is great. I just rented a new space right across the street from where I'm sitting, which is crazy to rent a new yoga space these days. But it's for a studio. It's for a streaming studio that not only I can use to do things on a world-class level, but for all the displaced homeless yoga teachers in New York who are sick and tired of streaming out of their
smart. They want to go to work again. They want to have professional quality. I can also see people getting fussier about the quality. Like, people were very forgiving at first. Now, if I'm in a class and someone says, "Is my mic working?" I'm like, seriously, really? Like, come on, get with it. You know. So it's no longer willing to tolerate bad quality. So I can see why that's popular. And yeah, as long as it's got that streaming quality, it's one for the future.
Yeah, well, that we're building it out. I'm later today. I'm meeting with the cable company to upgrade my upload speed. You know, because that's where
you're down with the kids. You're not a cantankerous old man, Leslie. You're down with the kids. Come on, upload speeds being updated and up to date anatomy knowledge. You got it going on.
I've been a tech guy since I was part of the AV club in school. I was the kid that would wheel around the over in the class. I was watching original Star Trek when it wasn't reruns. I'm a deep tech nerd.
We were gonna get all the volunteers red shirts, like from Star Trek, but we thought we better not in case they took it.
You don't want them to last past the first commercial.
Listen, I need to go. I got a meeting with someone more boring than you. So yogaanatomy.net is the place to go. When are you teaching at the conference? I'm pretty sure I'm hosting.
I don't know. You tell me. I don't have the schedule memorized.
Hang on.
I got other shit to do also, Mark. You know, you're not the only thing.
Stop being New York. Stop being New York. I'll find it.
All right.
Okay, where are we? It's Leslie Kaminoff. You're going to be in an American time, no doubt.
Yeah.
this. I think we're in the first week.
I
There we
believe
are.
that.
Keynote stage, 4 p.m. UK time, which is 8 a.m. California time.
What day is that?
Saturday the 17th on the
17th.
keynote stage. And I think we've got you on a couple of panels and things as well. We've got you on if you want to catch Leslie and you're in California, you might want to go to the panel on the 14th, which is at 10 p.m. UK time, which is, what is that, 8 hours back Californian time. So that's,
You must have so many time zones in your head right
there's
now.
There's a few. I didn't even know what time it is, what country. We're so international, the team. I was in a meeting the other day and there was a Saudi Arabian meeting, cooperating with an Israeli, a Croat, cooperating with a Serb, and an American and a Chinese. And I just thought, wow, we're the real fucking UN here, Leslie. You know, we hadn't even noticed we're in this sort of harmonious. And no one's having to score diversity points or privilege points on each other. It's just people.
That's not the notice about people. The stuff to notice about them is, you know, what they do, who they are, what their core values are, not the color of their skin or what they're wearing on their head or what's hanging between their legs.
Let's leave it there. That's a nice place to end, Leslie. So yoganatomy.net if people want to check you out. I'll see you at the conference. A pleasure, sir, as ever. Take
care, man. See you around.
Bye.